The cart rattled across cracked linoleum. Your mother's purse sat in the child seat, clasped shut, because she already knew the total before she hit the register. Every item she reached for has since vanished. Here are 25 grocery items Black women bought in the 1960s that don't exist anymore. Pet evaporated milk was the can every Black woman kept stacked 3 deep in the pantry, right behind the cornmeal. That tall red and white can cost about 15 cents in 1963, and it held an entire kitchen together. You punch 2 triangles into the top with a church key, one for pouring and one for air, and that thick, sweet-smelling milk hit the bowl with a weight regular milk never had. It went into pound cakes and sweet potato pies. It stretched a pot of macaroni when money was short and mouths were many. Mothers mixed it with Caro syrup and warm water for baby formula when the real brands cost 5 times as much. And those babies grew up just fine. The open can sat on the counter with foil pressed over the holes, collecting a faint metallic ring around the rim you could taste if you snuck a sip when nobody was looking. Pet milk has nearly vanished from grocery shelves, and the ritual of punching that can open disappeared with it. If you walked into a Black household on a Saturday morning in 1962, you could smell the starch before you saw it, a chalky, metallic thickness in the air that meant somebody was getting clothes ready for church. Argo gloss laundry. Starch came in a red box for 11 cents or a blue box for 19 cents, and Black women bought it by the armload. You mixed it with boiling water on the stove until it turned into a milky paste that clung to the wooden spoon. Then you dipped shirts and dresses in and wrung them out by hand until your knuckles ached from the twisting. The dried fabric could almost cut you. Collars stood at attention, pleats held their lines through a 3-hour sermon, and a starched white shirt caught the light in a way that said, "You took your appearance seriously." What nobody mentioned in polite company was the other use. Time magazine reported in 1967 that Black women, especially during pregnancy, ate Argo starch straight from the box, sometimes 2 or 3 boxes a day, a craving tied to the Southern tradition of eating white clay dirt. The company insisted their product was pure cornstarch and nothing else. The red box disappeared from store shelves for good. Somebody always had a bar of Octagon soap on the kitchen sink, and you learned real fast it was not for your hands unless you had done something to deserve it. Colgate made this 8-sided yellow bar out of LY and coconut oil, and Black women used it for everything the other soaps could not touch. Grease-splattered aprons, collar rings that Tide laughed at. Some mothers grated it with a cheese grater and dropped the flakes straight into the wash pot. Others rubbed it directly onto fabric, and the lye bit through the stain with a sharpness you felt in your fingertips. In Hoodoo tradition, the lemongrass scent was believed to ward off evil, so grandmothers washed the front stoop with it for protection, then scrubbed a child's mouth out with that same bar for talking back. Discontinued decades ago. Before that yellow soap left the counter, another shade of white was coming out of the icebox, and this one needed coloring too. Oleo margarine arrived in Black kitchens as a pale, waxy block that looked like lard and tasted like nothing until you worked it. The dairy lobby had fought for decades to keep manufacturers from selling it already colored. So every package came with a small capsule of orange-yellow dye tucked inside a plastic pouch. Your job, if you were a child in that house, was to pop that capsule and knead the color through the cold, stiff block until it spread even. The margarine was hard and the dye streaked in bright veins before blending, and you squeezed that bag until your fingers cramped and your palms turned yellow as egg yolk. Mothers bought Oleo because butter cost 3 times as much, and by the time you finished kneading, the block looked close enough that nobody at the table said a word. Wisconsin held the coloring ban until 1967, the very last state to let go, and by then, pre-colored tubs had already buried the ritual. The orange lid gave it away from across the kitchen. Sanka sat on the counter in a glass jar with that bright cap, and grandmothers reached for it the way other people reach for aspirin, out of habit, out of a doctor's order, they half believed. By the 60s, this instant decaffeinated coffee had become the evening drink of black women who spent their whole day, on their feet. 1 teaspoon hot water, a heavy pour of pet milk, 2 sugars. That formula did not change from house to house because everyone learned it from the same woman who raised them. Sanka tasted nothing like real coffee, thinner, flatter, almost dusty, but the point was the cup in the hand and the quiet kitchen after the last child fell asleep. 5 minutes of nothing. Kraft pulled Sanka off shelves, and the orange lid left kitchen counters for good. Few people under 50 have ever seen a bottle of Mrs. Stewart's liquid bluing, but in the 1960s, it sat in every black laundry room next to the bleach and the lye soap. The concept made no sense to children. You added blue liquid to white clothes to make them whiter, but grandmothers swore by it with a conviction that ended all argument. A few drops in the final rinse water were swirled by hand until the basin turned pale blue. Too much, and your sheets came out a ghostly gray that took 3 washes to undo. Just the right amount made whites glow with a brightness bleach alone never reached, a crisp, almost violet undertone that caught sunlight on the clothesline and told the whole block somebody in that house knew what they were doing. Mothers guarded their exact measurements like recipes they would never write down. To this day, nobody has fully explained why adding blue to white cotton creates the illusion of brighter white. Grandmothers did not need the science. They had the clothesline, and the clothesline did not lie. Sta-Flo liquid starch carried the full weight of respectability in every black household that believed wrinkled clothes were a personal failing. You poured it into the rinse or diluted it in a basin and dipped curtains, tablecloths, and Sunday shirts one at a time, squeezing out the excess until your forearms burned from the wringing. Curtains dried so stiff they crackled under your fingers like thin paper. Ironing starched fabric was its own war. The iron hissed against damp cotton and released a sharp steam that fogged the room and stuck to your skin. But the crease it left looked painted on. Sta-Flo was recently confirmed as discontinued, and homemakers who depended on it for decades now hunt online for leftover stock. The last jug sold for nearly $5 a jug, 7 times the original price. If you opened a box of Silver Dust laundry detergent in 1964, a folded Canon dish towel fell out before a single grain of soap touched the washer. Lever Brothers packed one inside every box, and for black women stretching a household budget past its last nerve, that towel turned a necessary purchase into a small gift you could hold in your hand. You were buying soap anyway, so you might as well get something for the kitchen out of it. Over months, a woman could fill a whole drawer, and each towel carried the faint powdery smell of silver dust long after its first wash. Kids were sent to the store with exact change and strict orders to get the silver dust, not the Tide, and do not come back with the wrong box. The detergent itself was ordinary. It cleaned fine but never outperformed anything. The towel was the only reason it stayed in the cart, and when Lever Brothers stopped packing them in, black women dropped that brand without a backward glance. If Silver Dust gave you a towel for free, the green stamp machine at checkout promised the whole house, one sticky square at a time. S&H. Green stamps were handed out at grocery stores and gas stations across black neighborhoods, and women collected them the way some folks collected grudges, with patience and a long memory. You licked each stamp and pressed it into a booklet page after page until filled books stacked up in a shoebox. A toaster took 6 books. A floor lamp took 12. Kids sat at the kitchen table licking and sticking for hours, tongues raw and bitter from the glue, while their mothers flipped through the catalog deciding what came next. S&H killed the program in 1998, and those redemption centers that anchored strip malls and black neighborhoods shut down without a sound. The box had 2 black children on the front, twin boys drawn in the exaggerated style that made white America laugh and black America look away. Gold Dust washing powder hit grocery shelves in 1889, and by the 1960s, those caricatures had been staring out from store aisles for 7 decades. The slogan read, "Let the twins do your work." 2 wide-eyed black kids scrubbing dishes in a wash tub, turning black labor into a punchline to sell soap. And yet, black women bought it. Not because they accepted the image, most carried a quiet fury about it, but because it cost half what the other brands charged, and the budget left no room for protest at the register. That was the math of the 1960s grocery aisle. You swallowed what you had to and kept moving. Lever Brothers discontinued the brand, and those boxes became collectible memorabilia sold at antique shops for $40 a piece to the same kind of people who found the picture amusing in the first place. The smell hit you the second your mother peeled back the foil, a blast of hot aluminum and overcooked gravy that filled the whole kitchen. Swanson TV dinners came in segmented aluminum trays that burned your fingers if you grabbed them wrong out of the oven. For black families in the early 1960s, they were the closest thing to a night off the stove. The fried chicken compartment was the size of a playing card. The mashed potatoes had a gluey pull that stuck to the roof of your mouth. The brownie in the corner was either rock hard or lava hot, never anything between. But none of that mattered because eating off a metal tray in front of the television felt like the future had arrived in your living room. Kids fought over who got the tray with the most gravy. Fathers ate them without complaint on the nights their wives worked second shift. The aluminum trays themselves became household tools, washed, stacked, and reused for everything from catching oven drips to holding screws in the garage. Swanson switched to plastic trays in 1986, and the original metal version, the one that left a faint tin taste on every bite, never came back. All Sweet margarine carried a quiet loyalty in black kitchens that the bigger brands never earned. Swift & Company packed it in a yellow box with red lettering, and it sat in the icebox next to the eggs and the leftover cornbread. It cost less than butter and spread easier than lard on a cold morning, and mothers used it for everything from greasing cake pans to slicking down a child's ashy elbows before church. The taste was mild, not quite butter, not quite nothing, and it melted into grits with a slow richness that cheaper margarines couldn't match. What kept black women reaching for All Sweet was the consistency. It didn't crumble when cold, didn't puddle when warm, and it baked a biscuit that rose the way it was supposed to. Swift shut down its meat-packing empire over the decades, and All Sweet vanished from the dairy case without announcement or apology. If all sweet kept things steady in the kitchen, the bathroom had its own kind of loyalty and its own kind of color. Colored toilet paper was a real product, sold in pink, blue, yellow, and mint green, and black women bought it to match their bathroom tiles without a shred of embarrassment. This was serious interior coordination. The pink paper went with the pink tub. The blue paper matched the blue towels. And if your bathroom was yellow, you found the yellow roll or you found a different store. Northern, Scott, and Charmin all sold colored rolls through the 1960s, and the paper had a faint chemical smell that regular white rolls did not carry, a dye-soaked sweetness that hit you when you pulled the plastic off a fresh pack. The colors bled slightly when wet, which meant the holder sometimes wore a faint pastel ring. Doctors started raising concerns about the dyes causing irritation, and by the early 2000s, colored toilet paper had disappeared from American shelves entirely. Try explaining to someone under 30 that your grandmother's bathroom was color coordinated down to the toilet roll. Nobody called it fake coffee to your grandmother's face, but that's exactly what Postum was, and she drank it like it owed her something. C.W. Post invented the drink in 1895 as a caffeine-free hot beverage made from roasted wheat, wheat bran, and molasses. And he marketed it using newspaper ads that claimed real coffee caused blindness, heart failure, and laziness. The scare campaign worked. By the 1960s, Postum sat in black pantries next to Sanka, and grandmothers stirred it into hot water with the same 2 sugars and the same pour of pet milk they gave everything else. It tasted like burned toast dissolved in dishwater, bitter, grainy, and thin. But the women who drank it believed they were protecting their hearts from the poison of real coffee. Post made a fortune off that fear. The company sold the brand to Kraft, who milked it for decades before quietly pulling it from shelves in 2007. The grandmothers who trusted those old scare ads were long gone by then. The can sat in the back of the pantry behind the pet milk and the pork and beans, and when your mother pulled it out on a Friday evening, you knew exactly what was coming. Jack mackerel came packed in water in a flat tin can with a Kiwin lid that peeled back to reveal a dense, oily fish pressed tight against the metal. The smell was immediate, a sharp, briny saltiness that took over the kitchen the second the lid rolled open. Your mother drained the liquid into the sink, dumped the fish into a bowl, and went to work with a fork, picking out the soft, translucent bones and the dark strip of bloodline that ran down the center. Then came the egg, the diced onion, the cornmeal, and enough salt and pepper to make the whole thing hold together when she shaped it into patties with her bare hands. Those patties hit a cast iron skillet loaded with smoking hot Crisco, and the sizzle was loud enough to call every child in the house to the kitchen doorway. Fried golden on both sides, served with white bread and hot sauce. The canned mackerel brands that stocked black grocery stores in the 60s have mostly disappeared, and the Friday night fish patty went with them. Before Cool Whip took over every holiday table in America, there was Lucky Whip, and if you remember it at all, you are telling on your age. Lucky Whip was a powdered dessert topping sold in a box, mixed with milk and whipped by hand until it turned into a pale, slightly sweet foam that sat on top of Jell-O and sweet potato pie. It never tasted quite like real cream. It had a chemical, almost plasticky undertone that clung to the roof of your mouth if you ate too much straight from the bowl, which every child did when nobody was watching. The box cost about $1, and for black women feeding a full table on a tight budget, Lucky Whip stretched a single pie into enough dessert for everyone. Cool Whip showed up already made in a tub, and Lucky Whip did not stand a chance. By the late 1970s, it was gone, and most people forgot it ever existed. Hunt's Snack Pack Pudding came in a tin can with a pull-tab lid, and the sound of that lid popping open was the sound of a packed lunch that somebody cared about. In the 1960s, these little cans held chocolate, butterscotch, or vanilla pudding sealed under a metal top that required real finger strength to peel back. And if you pulled too fast, pudding splattered the front of your shirt before you ever got a spoonful. The tin itself had a sharp, raw edge once opened, and mothers warned their kids not to lick the lid unless they wanted a cut tongue to go with their dessert. But the pudding inside was thick, dense, and cold from the icebox in a way that plastic cups never matched. Hunt switched to plastic containers in 1984, and the tin version, the one that tasted faintly of metal and danger, became a thing only older kids remembered. The plastic was safer, the tin was better. If tin gave pudding its edge, glass gave soda its soul, and nothing proved that like a bottle of Nehi grape. The Royal Crown Company bottled it in heavy green glass that turned your hands cold the second you pulled it from the store cooler, and for black kids in the 60s, a Nehi grape was the definition of a good day. The soda was purple enough to stain your lips, your tongue, and anything it spilled on, and the sweetness was so sharp it made your back teeth ache on the first swallow. You drank it on the front porch in the summer, the glass sweating in your grip, and the empty bottle went back to the store for a 2-cent deposit that your mother expected returned to her hand, not spent on penny candy. Corner stores in black neighborhoods stacked Nehi crates by the door, and the bottles clinked against each other with a sound that meant the weekend had finally started. The glass bottle format disappeared from mainstream stores decades ago, replaced by plastic and aluminum that never held the cold the same way or made the same sound when you set them down. When your mother worked late, and she worked late more often than anyone talked about, dinner came from a can with a red and white label. Franco-American spaghetti was soft, orange, and sweet, in a way that no Italian grandmother would have recognized. But for black kids in the 60s, it was the taste of a weeknight when the rules relaxed. You heated it on the stove in a small pot, and the sauce bubbled thick and slow, popping tiny orange dots onto the stovetop that dried into spots you would scrub off later. The noodles were overcooked before they ever hit the can, limp, uniform, and coated in a tomato sauce that tasted more like sugar than tomato. Older siblings heated it for younger ones. Kids ate it straight from the pot with a slice of white bread to soak up the last of the sauce. Campbell's, who owned Franco-American, eventually phased the brand out in 2004, and that familiar red label left the canned goods aisle for good. An RC Cola and a moon pie. If you grew up black in the South, you already know. That was a meal, a snack, and a dare all at once. Royal Crown Cola came in a heavy glass bottle for $0.10, and it had a sweetness that hit different from Coca-Cola, sharper on the front, smoother going down, with a fizz that bit the inside of your nose if you drank too fast. RC was the underdog cola. It sat in the cooler next to Coke and Pepsi and cost a penny or two less, and for black families watching every cent, that penny mattered. Kids carried the bottle by the neck on the walk home, and the glass was thick enough to survive being dropped on a sidewalk at least once. The 10-cent glass bottle vanished from corner stores years ago, replaced by plastic that tastes flat before you finish the first sip. The pairing with a moon pie survives in memory only, and only if you're old enough to remember when a dime bought something worth drinking. The bins stretched the full length of the candy aisle, each one filled to the brim with a different color, a different shape, a different promise. Brach's Pick-a-Mix was the honor system in sugar form. You grabbed a clear plastic bag, picked up the metal scoop, and loaded whatever you wanted while your mother's back was turned. Butterscotch discs, peppermint nougats, caramel squares wrapped in cellophane that stuck to your fingers before you got them in the bag. Neapolitan coconut squares that were pink, brown, and white and tasted like sweetened sawdust. But you ate them anyway because they were free to touch and nobody was watching the scale. The scoops were cold and heavy, and the bins had a thick, waxy sweetness that hung in the air 3 aisles over. Kids learned to pack the bag tight and fold the top down to hide the weight. Mothers learned to check the bag before it hit the counter. The bins disappeared from grocery stores in the early 2000s because of liability, hygiene, and shrinkage. An entire generation lost its first lesson in unsupervised decision-making. Carnation malted milk came in a tall glass jar with a red lid, and for Black mothers in the 60s, it was the trick that turned a glass of plain milk into something a stubborn child would actually finish. 2 heaping spoonfuls of that chocolate malt powder stirred hard with a long spoon until the milk turned brown and the foam rose to the top. The powder never dissolved all the way. Gritty little clusters clung to the bottom of the glass and to the edges of your lips. And the taste was richer and darker than regular chocolate milk, almost smoky. Kids drank it before school, after school, and before bed, and mothers bought it because the jar lasted longer than Hershey's syrup and did not drip all over the counter. Carnation eventually rebranded and reformulated. The original malt powder in the glass jar, the one that turned your milk into something worth sitting still for, stopped showing up on store shelves without anyone making an announcement. But before any of those jars left the shelf, there was the one your mother set on the counter every single morning without fail. Carnation Instant Breakfast came in a slim envelope inside a box, and the powder turned a glass of cold milk into something thick and sweet that passed for a meal when the morning was moving too fast for the stove. She stirred it with a fork, not a spoon, always a fork, because she said it broke the lumps out faster, and handed it to you with one instruction: finish it. The chocolate was the only flavor worth drinking. The vanilla tasted like chalk. The strawberry tasted like a lie. But you drank whatever she poured because there was no negotiation at that counter, and the glass was empty before your shoes were tied. Carnation rebranded it as Breakfast Essentials. Years later, changed the formula, changed the packaging. The name on the shelf means nothing now to anyone who remembers what that fork sounded like hitting the inside of a glass at 6 in the morning. Log cabin syrup came in a tin container shaped like an actual log cabin, and children held that little tin house in both hands at the breakfast table like it was something worth keeping. The syrup poured slow from a small spout near the chimney, thick and dark and sweet enough to make a stack of plain pancakes taste like Saturday morning had a flavor. The tin was warm from sitting near the stove, and the syrup inside had a maple sweetness cut with corn syrup that coated your tongue and would not let go. When the syrup ran out, the tin did not get thrown away. It became a coin bank. A dollhouse, a thing a child carried around the house for reasons only a child understood. The company switched to plastic bottles shaped like nothing, and the little tin cabin that once sat on every Black breakfast table became a flea market find priced at $15, more than the syrup inside it ever cost. And then there was the lard. Armour Star or Swift? It came in a tin pail with a wire handle, and it sat next to the stove in every Black kitchen like it had been there since the house was built. Your grandmother scooped it out with a tablespoon, dropped it into a cast iron skillet that had never seen soap, and waited for the shimmer. That shimmer meant the pan was ready. Biscuits rose because of that lard. Fried chicken crackled because of it. Pie crusts broke apart in flakes so thin they dissolved on your tongue before you could chew. The smell of lard heating in a black skillet was the smell of a kitchen that knew what it was doing. Heavy, warm, almost sweet, with a faint pork undertone that no vegetable shortening has ever matched. Crisco came along in a can with a clean white label and a promise of something healthier, and the tin pail got pushed to the back of the shelf. But the women who cooked with it knew what they lost. Every biscuit since has been reaching for that flavor and falling short. Some grocery aisles hold more memory than any photo album ever could. If this list brought you back, share it with someone who remembers.